In this slide, I would like to introduce a TED Talk by Professor Avi Rubin, who talk about how they hacked different IoT devices, including implanted medical devices such as pacemakers. So please note that this video is recorded in 2011, a decade after the first Internet of Things the term is coined. And at the moment, the video is again another more than a decade old. So you can get an idea the evolution of IoT since 2001 to date. In this diagram, we can clearly see the four methods we are going to talk about: the authentication, authorization, network enforcement of policies, and then the visibility and the control. Before we get into the details of each of these methods, it is important to understand that IoT devices do need to have identity because otherwise we can't trust them. However, the problem is when the identity of a device is linked to the identity of the owner, that could violate the privacy. So we need to find a ways to have an identity for both owners and for the devices, but be able to have decouple them so we don't violate their privacy. Because otherwise, devices are the representatives of people, and then all the activities are performed by the people are recorded by these devices could be easily linked together. So this process is called shadowing. The devices use a virtual identity to act on behalf of the owner, but it does not reveal who the owner is. Authentication is the process or the action of providing or showing something to be true, genuine, or valid. So that is how you show who you are, your identity. Basically, this is the user account that you show that who you are. Similar to users, IoT devices could also have identities where they show who they are. So IoT devices connected to a network create a trust relationship based on validated identity, such as a password, token, biometrics, RFID, digital certificates, or using the endpoint MAC address. The second method is authorization. Authorization refers to the permission, whether you have the permission to do some task or look at some data. For example, if you have a smart thermostat, what kind of devices can it talk to? What kind of information can it collect and store and then request from other devices? So the authorization of the device will tell what it can do and what it can access and share. The next one is network enforced policies. So here we talk about controlling the elements or any kind of data routed and transported through the network. So we use security protocols and then try to determine what kind of devices are allowed to communicate with other devices, what kind of security protocols need to be put in place in order to make this communication approved. And also you can think about what kind of external devices, like what kind of services it can talk to. So all these network enforcements happen based on policies defined in a particular IoT network. For example, your smart home devices might be allowed to communicate with certain services, but not the others. So if you want to enable that, you will need to give the permission and authorize through the network enforcement policy, because otherwise the packets will be blocked from communicating from particular services. Finally, you have the outer barrier, which is the visibility and control, which provides reconnaissance, threat detection, threat mitigation of all elements that aggregate and correlate information. For example, it will monitor the communication, and see whether there are valid communication, anything abnormal or anomalies is happening. What are the data sent through the network? Even though sometimes the data is encrypted, you can look out for the size of the packet and see what kind of data it is being sent, like whether it is image data or high resolution data, or how frequently it is communicating. Because if it is an abnormal behavior depending on the device, for example, if it is a doorbell and if it is continuously sending data without even in request, or if something happens in particular time of the day which is unusual, so those kind of looking for threat detection and mitigation activities could happen in this layer, in this method. Due to the immaturity of the IoT devices, there are a lot of IoT products come with security weaknesses embedded to them. So these are the list of things that you can do to secure the off-the-shelf IoT devices. So for example, as soon as you bought the devices, you need to think about doing these things if they are not done by default. So you need to disable the default password. And then you need to disable the universal plug and play. So which just allows you to devices to connect automatically, make it available to the networks, because otherwise the malicious parties could get advantage of that. Disable the remote management, and then make sure you keep updated, because the timeline between particular IoT products is produced, sent to the market, and then you bring it home and connect it. There could be a significant gap where the original manufacturers may have released software updates. So you need to think about keeping the software up to date, and then set up and use encryption and certificates where possible, depending on whether the device permits it. And also, of course, keeping the device physically secure. So if you are deploying a camera as a security camera or a doorbell, think about putting in a place that is not easy to access for any malicious parties. You can put it on higher places people cannot reach without a ladder. So those kind of things you can think about doing when you're buying IoT devices off the shelf. In lesson 2, we discuss fog computing in detail, and in these discussions I specifically talk about the security that it provides, because when you are using a fog, that means the computation and data is distributed. So it makes it less risky, because it doesn't send the data to the cloud all the time. And also it do provide aggregation and other summarizing mechanisms within the fog, which means the amount of data sent to the cloud is reduced. As therefore, anyone who is intercepting data in between the edge or the cloud to the in between the cloud is reduced. So even though someone is intercepting, they don't get the whole story, because there are aggregated data sent to the cloud. Most of the decisions may be taken by the fog devices as well. And also, if you are doing decision making, so if you are sending all the data to the cloud make the decision and send the command, anyone can intercept, or at least there's a chance that they could get compromised and the commands may be intercepted. But if you are not talking to the cloud at all and making the decision locally, and then maybe at the end of the day sending the data to the cloud saying, hey, throughout the day I make these kind of decisions, in that sense it makes the better in terms of security, because there's less risk on getting compromised. And I also talk about the privacy, because if you're sending all the data to the cloud all the time, then if the cloud get hacked, the centralized data, the data set is exposed. But if you are storing the data in edge, distributed across different nodes, then the single hack does not expose all the data. So the bad guys or the malicious parties need to go and hack every each of the fork devices, which is much difficult than hacking a one large server. This is very much applied to the smart homes and smart home hubs, especially if your IoT devices are connected to a smart home hub and then hub is making the decision without sending the data to the cloud. Then at least it reduces the chance of getting hacked during the transmission. Of course, you will need to make the smart home hub or the fog more secure, because if the hub is a device that allows to install applications to enhance the functionalities, then malicious parties could deploy some malware through these applications. Yes, there is such risk in that kind of scenarios, but it reduces the communication-based risks.